All right. Hi, and good morning to everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning for our next installment of our Road to Rowan SOM virtual series. I'm so excited about this session. I think you all are going to love everything that's brought up. So I'm joined this morning by my colleague, John Salino, who's the Assistant Director of Admissions, and also our Dean of Admissions, Ms. Paula Watkins. We're also joined by Ms. Yvonne Ortiz, who's our Director of DEI here at Rowan SOM, and as well as a panel of current students. So they're going to go over diversity, the history at Rowan SOM, and all of the ways that that's celebrated. And yeah, I'm just so excited about this session. I was kind of flipping through Yvonne's notes earlier. So yeah, Paula, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, and thank you everybody for attending today. And I want to thank John and Sarah again for the work they put together on this Road to Medical School series. As our accepted students know, it's a great way to bring you up close and personal to a lot of really amazing people at the institution that are supporting you throughout your 4 years of medical school. And as Sarah said, this is a really important presentation for us. We're super excited, and thank Ms. Yvonne Ortiz and our medical students, soon to be physicians, and who are going to share a lot of great insight with you. So thank you so much. And like I said, turn it back over to Sarah.
All right. Well, like I said, we're joined by Yvonne Ortiz. So yeah, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can kick us off.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Yvonne Ortiz. As Sarah said, I'm the inaugural Director of DEI at Rowan SOM. Sarah is going to graciously, and thank you in advance, Sarah, run my PowerPoint, and that'll just help me be able to just kind of talk a little bit about DEI, the history of DEI at Rowan SOM, and to make sure when we talk about DEI that we start to, develop a shared language, if you will, of what we mean by that work. So you see, and I just need to shout out, although he is not here today, but shout out in this opening slide, Dean Thomas Cavalieri, who is our Dean of Rowan SOM. And the reason why I want to shout him out is not, for political, looking good, but, DEI work isn't possible unless leadership buys in. And he's our leader. And so everything that we talk about, whether it's admissions and bringing in a diverse class, all of those things are supported by our dean. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't, shout him out as one of my bosses. And you'll also see that my email is on the slide. I'll also put it in the chat if you have additional questions. I'm also very available and accessible on the web. There's lots of information about me if you want to know more after today. Next slide. So I want to just talk about terminology for just a second, because we hear diversity, equity, and inclusion a lot. We hear those words thrown around, and people sometimes think that they are all the same thing, and they are not. So when we say that we're an office or I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, it actually means 3 different types of outcomes and things in an organization. So when I think about diversity, think about who's in the room, right? Who's in the room, and it's really just the presence of differences, and the presence is certainly important, and a lot of what we focused on in higher education over the past 20 and 30 years as it relates to diversity has really focused on who's in the room, who's on our campus. Sometimes we may get into, you know, who gets to teach, right? And who gets to lead. But more often than not, diversity really tends to just be focused in higher ed with respect to students. And medical education is no exception. So when we talk about diversity, we're talking about who's in the room of all the many different things that make us human and make us different. And some of the things that we've listed here on the slide. You'll also hear a term in medicine, URIM. And just so you know, URIM stands for underrepresented in medicine. So undergraduate medical education has, and graduate medical education has designated certain groups, certain people. It may be women in the sciences. It may be African-American or Black students, Latinx students, to be underrepresented in medicine. And so sometimes you'll hear that term, you know, said often as well in these kinds of discussions. So I just wanted to give you a heads up of that. Next slide. When we think about inclusion, we think about the extent to which the people are in the room, the extent to which those people actually feel and are actually welcomed, right? The inclusion outcomes are met when your institution and your program are truly inviting to everyone there, and that people are actually able to participate fully in the decision-making processes and development opportunities within an organization or group. So if diversity is who's in the room, inclusion is what do you get to do while you're in the room, right? And then when I think about equity, equity is really about promoting justice. And so that really requires us to start looking at procedures, processes, and how we distribute resources. And so it does require us to actually think about power and think about how we allocate resources and how we give people a seat at the table to help make decisions in that room that affects that whole organization. So when you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, there are three connected things, as we'll see on the next slide, but they are each distinct. And you need all three of those things to create a culture of belonging. Let's go to the next slide, please. Oh, I'm missing a slide. Maybe not. Okay. Can we go back one? Okay. So when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, one of the things that I want to point out is that in order for an institution to really thrive from a DEI perspective, you need to make progress and have goals that actually tackle each one of those elements. So just focusing on, for example, who's in the room or who's coming to your medical school in this case, isn't going to necessarily improve climate or change culture of an institution, right? You're just changing who's coming through. And that's a really important aspect, as we're going to see here with some of the facts. So in medical education, we have focused a lot of attention or some attention on kind of who's coming to medical school. And that is hugely important. We have a nationwide shortage of physicians. New Jersey has a shortage of physicians. And so I want to just point out a few facts about US medical schools, both allopathic and osteopathic. Nationally, most medical students come from the upper two quartiles of income, regardless of race. That might be surprising to you, and you might be like, well, hey, Yvonne, I'm not rich. I wasn't born with money. But something you need to know in terms of a trend is that most medical students actually come from, you know, from better resourced, financially resourced households. And this figure has remained relatively unchanged for 30 years. And I'm sure some of the medical students that are on here, some of you who are, you know, coming to SOM this summer, probably know, you know, medical school is expensive. And so, and it can be, you know, cost prohibitive for people to come to medical school just because of sheer cost of everything. Less than 12% of American doctors are Black or Latinx. About 2.2 of American physicians are African American men, and 2.4 are African American women. I just like to put that in context. I know we featured a showing of Black men in white coats last February and had a wonderful panel discussion. And, one of the things that I think came from that is that people started to develop this notion that there was such a huge difference between the number of African-American male and female physicians, and there actually isn't. We need more Black physicians, quite frankly, all around. But I wanted to just share that data with you. The proportion of physicians who are Black has only increased 4 percentage points over the past 120 years. 0.4% of physicians are Native American or American Indian, and 0.2 of them are at osteopathic schools. And if you know anything about the osteopathic tradition, you know that comes from American Indian heritage and philosophy. 80% of US medical schools do not collect sexual orientation information during the admission or enrollment processes. So I'm not able to provide you more data in terms of, medical students that identify as LGBTQIA because most schools don't even collect it. In 2011, the average number of hours focused on LGBT health at US medical schools is 5 hours in all of medical education. And current projections don't promise to be any better. And so when we think about DEI in the context of medical education, we also at SOM think about what it is that we're teaching and how we're preparing our future physicians to serve a diverse population. And one of the things that we've done, and I'll show you a little bit later, is a focus on how do we improve our curriculum with regard to LGBTQ health. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we talked a little bit about terminology, and some of these people will look familiar to you as we go into the student panel because 2 of them are here today. But my position exists because of students and alumni. And it's based on because of a student and alumni organization called the Black Collective. So our current president of the Black Collective, student Dr. Wallace, who is soon to be in less than 4 weeks, Dr. Wallace, and shout out to her. Melvin Ways, the vice president. Well, I lost track, Melvin. I think you're tell me, Melvin, what's your current title on the Black Collective?
I'm the vice.
You're the vice. Okay, you are the vice president of the Black Collective. And Melvin Ways is also, student Dr. Ways is also the president of the Student Government Association. So, thank you, Mr. President, for being here. Thought you weren't going to hear that this morning, right? And then we also have, and the students will introduce themselves later, but the Black Collective is the reason why my position is here. They saw a need. They saw several needs of ways that they felt like SOM could improve and concerns with climate. And I don't want to speak for the students. I think they can do that themselves as they're, responding to our panel later on. And then certainly you're welcome to ask questions throughout. But it's because of their work that my position exists. Now, something that you need to know about my position is that I am part of a larger division of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Rowan University. The good news of that means is that I have a support system. I report to Dr. Monica Williams-Shealy, who is the Senior Vice President in the Division of DEI. She reports to President Hausman, the president of the university. And then I have a dotted line to Dean Cavalieri, who I shouted out earlier today, who's the Dean of the School of SOM. So the Black Collective saw some concerns, had some concerns, but also provided solutions, right? And one of those solutions, if you will, was having my position to be able to start to corral and to identify what were those things with regard to DEI that we needed to work on as a school, both to improve the climate, not just for students, but for faculty, for staff, for residents, and also in thinking about how it is that we're preparing our next generation of physicians to serve diverse communities. And so I'd be remiss, the work that they have done has benefited students with disabilities, it's benefited LGBTQIA students, it's benefited all students of color and really diverse learners. So, you know, just they were awarded an excellence in diversity for the practice of medicine from the university. They were also shouted out by Dean Cavalieri at last year's commencement. So I am very forever grateful to them for their work and their advisement and their encouragement. And so I'd be remiss if I talked about DEI at SOM and didn't mention them. So you can ask them questions and pick their brains. You know, after we do the panel, if you have questions. And I'm going to leave it up to the students to share their information if they want to stay in touch or not after today. Let's go to the next slide, please. I mentioned earlier, you know, we're part of a larger Rowan University DEI division. And I do want to just put in the chat the link for the division. So, sick. I don't do well talking and trying to. It's not letting me, Sarah, it's not letting me send it. Oh, here we go. Okay. I thought it wasn't going to let me send it to all the attendees. Got it. So I put the link in the chat so you can get to it if you want to take a look. It provides, you know, some definitions and commitments university-wide in the division of DEI that every college and school of how it is that we frame DEI outcomes. And that's why I say being part of a larger university-wide framework is so important because we're able to provide a certain amount of transparency and accountability university-wide, and also get support in that process of trying to achieve these outcomes. So I want to point out to you three, yes, we can go to the next slide, thank you. I want to point out to you three university-wide DEI strategic priorities. The first one is all about creating an inclusive and equitable campus community, and it is a focus on faculty and staff. Recruitment and retention of faculty and staff, the climate and systems for faculty and staff to thrive. Some of these faces may look familiar to you. On the upper left-hand side is Dr. Millicent Chanel, who is our Associate Dean of Curriculum. You will, if you don't know Dr. Chanel, you will get to know Dr. Chanel well over your next 4 years here. We have, but all of these faculty here are our current faculty at SOM. Dr. Chanel is probably the person you're going to see the most among them over these next few years. So strategic priority one is really focused on, you know, thinking about DEI from the standpoint of faculty and staff, right? The idea is that, you know, you can have diverse students, but if you don't have diverse faculty teaching them, that's a concern, right? So what is it that we need to do to really support those efforts? Next slide, please. And then, of course, how do we move those faculty into positions of leadership is also of critical importance. So strategic priority 2 is all about not just the recruitment, but the retaining and supporting a more diverse community. And when we talk about diversity, we're also talking about different learning styles, et cetera. So we're not just talking about the physical appearance of human beings, but we're also talking about, you know, thinking about how it is that we teach. You know, and we've done a considerable amount of professional learning in different parts of SOM with regard to universal design to appeal to more learners, for example. But this all falls into strategic priority number 2. And you see pictures of, that's a picture of SNMA on the top, and on the bottom are some of the representatives from AIM, Allies in Medicine. Next slide. And then strategic priority 3 focuses on inclusive teaching, scholarship, and professional development. And that we have spent a considerable amount of time, particularly with professional development. I'm going to show you some examples in a little bit of some of the resources and things that we've been doing with faculty and staff primarily. You see on the top photo, those are some representatives from LMSA. You see student Dr. Ways, who I introduced earlier, as well as Tara Young, who is there as a representative from Idea Council. And Idea Council is a student organization. It's a portion, it's a sub-portion, if you will, of student government that focuses exclusively on diversity and diversity issues. And all of these different student organizations that you're seeing all have a role in our DEI committee at SOM. So our DEI committee at SOM is comprised of faculty, students, and staff. And that is the entity that helps me move forward our goals and action plans related to all 3 of these strategic priorities. Let's go to the next slide. Now you might be wondering, well, okay, so you've got these goals and you've got all this nice stuff on the website, and where does that come from? And is this all performative? And I have to tell you, when I first got here, my first charge from Dr. Shealy was, I started in September of 2020, the middle of September of 2020. And at the time I was living in Texas, so I still had to move while I was starting work. That was lots of fun, going through working and moving all at the same time. But in October and November of 2020, we conducted a climate survey, if you will. Rowan University, as a larger institution on the Glassboro campus, had conducted one earlier in that year, a year before actually. And so the university was waiting for my position to start to do a climate survey specifically for the SOM campus. So the process was the identical process that the rest of the university went through. So there were select people that completed a DEI self-assessment based on best practices that we know in DEI, based on the institutional priorities. And then there were listening sessions held, separate listening sessions for faculty, students, and staff. There were multiple ones. I was the only person present. There were a number of things that were done to ensure confidentiality. And then the results of that work was shared with the Dean's Cabinet, with Executive Council, with our academic chairs, alumni, certainly our DEI committees, and also shared with students. And there were 4 kind of general subcommittees that were created from that work. The first focuses on affordability and admissions, and I'm not going to read the slide to you, but you see what the different objectives are. But the first one, with the paper airplane, focuses on affordability and admissions. The second one, the wrench, focuses on academic, emotional, and social support for students. The third one, the bell, focuses on professional learning. How do we create a shared language across Rowan SOM? And I will tell you that over this period of time, the focus has been on faculty and staff. And I will say this, it's not because, students can't benefit from the professional learning. You most certainly can. But what we found is that, what I know about transformative change is that change needs to start at the top. And so we need to create a shared language of what do we mean by DEI? What's a microaggression? Why certain things are problematic? Why you should use certain language and not use other language? Things like that, that not everyone knows. And we're all at different stages of development and understanding because we all have different lived experiences. So a lot of that professional learning has focused on leadership, has focused on faculty and staff over these past 18 months. And then the fourth area with the clock is all about instruction, is all about, how do we prepare our future physician workforce? Looking at the curriculum. Now, the curriculum team has done a fantastic job, and you have SGL and you have PBL and you have, these options in terms of curriculum. But looking at, how do we talk about the history of race and racism in medicine? Do we talk about it? And how do we talk about that in a way that helps advance our understanding as you move along into years 3 and 4? How does that help you be a more culturally competent physician? Where are places that we need to be talking much more meaningfully about LGBTQI health? So there's a number of things that go along with that. So our work over these past 18 months has been a lot of faculty professional development with particular faculty in particular blocks, and that work is ongoing and continues. And then the new subcommittee that was added is with regard to faculty and staff hiring, evaluation, and promotion, and that's not on the slide. That is a new subcommittee, and that is one in which we're looking at how do we develop better mentoring systems for junior faculty who are women, who are people of color, to not only get hired, but how are they then mentored and supported to aspire to leadership and to gain leadership roles in academic medicine. So that's in a nutshell, some of the work that we've been doing. I am also part of ACGME's Equity Matters leadership learning community, trying to work on tackling some of the issues with regard to DEI in a GME context. But I won't get into that here, but it's just something for you to know that is something that SOM that we are involved in with regard to ACGME and looking at DEI from a GME perspective. Let's go to the next slide, please. And then finally, everything that I have talked about in terms of, what are we doing at SOM? What are we doing in the Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences? Because they too, I also lead their DEI committee and work closely with the Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences. All of our goals and action items and where we are with that is all part of a division of DEI Dashboard. It is a public facing thing. I'm actually going to, when I stop talking, put the link in the chat. Let's see. And it will give you all of the different goals and things that we've worked on, what's in progress, what's completed, what's in progress and what's been completed, and maybe things that we haven't yet started, right? So we update that probably about quarterly. We try to update that about quarterly, and I just check in with the DEI committees to see, if there are things that we need to be adding. There'll probably be some things that'll probably change and shift within the next month or so. So what you see now and what you see a month and a half from now will probably be a bit different. None of those goals actually go away, so you'll be able to also look at that from a historical context as well. So the reason why we provide that as a division on the website is for accountability and transparency. So these are the things we're working on, and this is this is where we're at with them. Let's see. Let's go to the next slide. And then lastly, look at that great picture, student Dr. Ways. So as I get to know you, you will learn about me. I cannot stand taking pictures. I absolutely hate it. So while I was very grateful for the company in that picture, I was very miserable taking that picture. But this is, and I put the link to Rowan SOM's annual report. On page 5, you will see this page of the document. And it lists actually the accomplishments and kind of a timeline from the point that I was hired in September of 2020 through to December of 2021. It's the 2021 annual report, so it only goes until December. And obviously there'll be another one coming out in a few months, but so that also will give you some context in terms of what we've been doing. So if there are no other questions, you can find the DEI portion of the Rowan SOM website. If you go to the Rowan SOM website, the top header, you go under inclusion, click inclusion, and that's where all the DEI stuff is. There is a section called resources and some of the professional learning we've been doing on implicit bias and microaggressions and, you know, ally, accomplice, and advocate, and you know, what does that mean in terms of being an ally? All of those different kinds of things are safe space trainings. We always provide resources, and so these next couple slides, you'll see these are just samples of some of the resources that you'll see, and a lot of these resources are actually available on the website if you want to do some reading. I highly recommend this book. I've read all of these books. My most recent read is the one on the lower left-hand corner called The Remedy, and it's Voices of Queer and Trans Voices in Healthcare. If you have not ever read Medical Apartheid, it is very dense, but it is it's quite helpful, and actually I think it should be required reading for every medical school, but that's just my personal opinion, but as well as medical bondage. But let's go to the next couple slides and just show them some of the other resources. And so just to give you some context, can we go back one? I'm sorry, Sarah. When we talk about LGBTQIA plus patient-centered care, so in a lot of my sessions with, for example, academic chairs and faculty, I provide them resources like this, and actually will follow up with chairs, encouraging them to take advantage of free resources like this one shown by the Human Rights Campaign, because they have a whole set of resources that they provide for LGBTQIA patient-centered care that not enough people are taking advantage of. So then I follow up with those areas to see where are changes that we can make in our clinical areas to be more affirming of LGBTQIA people. So just another example of some of the work that we're doing. All right. Well, are there any burning questions? This was the talk part, and now we're going to get to the fun part with the students. So I just want to check in and see if there are any questions I need to answer before I move forward.
I don't see anything that popped up in the chat, Yvonne.
Okay.
Yes, I think we're good to start on the student panel part.
All right. Awesome. Awesome. Well, this is the part that I've been looking forward to. And as I said, I'm going to keep sipping on some water. I'm fighting a stomach bug, so I'm not feeling the greatest right now. So forgive me. But I do want to point everyone to the bios that admissions sent to everyone earlier this morning, right, John? Was it this morning?
Yep.
Okay. I'm seeing a question in here. It looks like that's probably more a question for students, so I'm going to hold on to that. Do you see that, John? In the chat, in
Yep,
the Q&A? Okay, great.
Do you want to do
All
it now,
right.
or do you want to wait for it?
No, I'll wait. I'll
Sounds
wait
good.
for it. I'll wait for that at the end. Okay. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. What I'm going to do in the interest of time, it's 11:41, and I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to talk, is if each of our student panelists can please introduce themselves. And I'm actually going to call on you by name, so you don't have to just jump in there. So I'm going to start with our student government president, student Dr. Melvin Ways.
Hi, everybody. I'm assuming you can hear me. My name is student Dr. Melvin Ways. I'm introduced several times over as the Student Government Association president and vice chair of the Black Collective, but I'm also a third-year medical student from Camden, New Jersey. Um, it, I have a passion for giving back to underserved communities, and that includes students who are trying to come from those communities. And I really think it's important for um, all of us to take account of how we can do better in serving everyone, not just, those who most need it, but if we help them, everybody benefits is the way I look at it. So thank you for being here today.
All right. Student Dr. Wallace.
Good morning, everyone. I'm student Dr. Demarco Wallace. I'm a fourth year student, so by the time you start, I won't be here, but I'll be available via email or phone. Um, I'm also the chair of the Black Collective. I'm really interested in improving health disparities, but more importantly, achieving population concordance, where our medical sector looks like with the population. So that includes ensuring that you all make it across the stage when you start here in 4 years, and just providing all the support that you need to get there.
Thank you. Student Dr. Antoine.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Alicia Antoine. I'm also a fourth year student with student Dr. Wallace. One of the major roles that I've played over the last year is mentorship chair for the Black Collective. And my goal has been to provide mentorship and support to students, particularly across the first 3 years. It's been my experience that mentorship and support are really, lay the groundwork for students to be successful in this process. And I look forward to talking to you.
Student Dr. Mata.
Hi, I'm Darlene Mata. I'm a third year medical student from Paterson, New Jersey. Some of my goals are mentorship, so I'm very involved in our Rowan SOM community. I talk to all students pretty much and provide any little piece of advice that I can. And my ultimate goal as a physician is to serve the underserved.
Student Dr. Mcdaniel.
How's everyone doing? My name is student Dr. Mcdaniel. I'm from East Orange, New Jersey. I'm a third year medical student as well. I echo the sentiments of the panelists before me, and I'm hoping to serve the underserved. That's one of my missions. I'm also passionate about mentorship. I love speaking with students and giving them an what I like to call an alternative perspective to medicine and diversity and inclusion as well. So look forward to meeting you and speaking with you all today.
Thank you. Student Dr. Naya.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Wilson Nia. I'm a third year medical student. I'm originally from Cameroon, West Africa. Lived in California and then came to New Jersey. Did my college in California State University. Again, we all here kind of share the same sentiment. I have a very strong passion for mentorship. I'm probably involved in every mentorship program Rowan SOM has, so you're gonna see my name over there. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to talking to all of you.
And student Dr. Nia, I apologize. I've been mispronouncing people's names, and so please chalk it up to my head.
No worries. You're doing good. You're doing good.
I'm fine with correcting myself and being corrected. And last but not least, student Dr. Demarco.
Hi, I am Noelle. I echo everybody's sentiment with the caveat that I've actually been able to benefit from a lot of the things that the third and fourth years have talked about. Alicia has hooked me up with a mentor that looks like me and understands some of the things that I have gone through. Darlene has given me advice, and Wilson and I have hung out on more than one occasion. So I am really excited to be here and give my perspective as what it's like to be a first year student, kind of post all of the things that Yvonne has talked about in her presentation.
All right, so now that we've done introductions, I'm going to stop being formal. And I will say this, we are, well, I won't say we, you know, soon to be medical students in the audience am not formal. Everybody knows you call me by my first name. I don't do the whole, I'm not that way. But I start off with student doctor because I have a tremendous amount of respect for all of my students and the journeys that you have all chosen to be a part of, because this is not an easy journey, and I don't say that to scare anyone. And I'm just saying this from a layperson's perspective, right? Watching what they go through, and you know, trying to support them as best I can. And so the formality is actually done as a show of respect. But I am at this point going to just refer to everyone by their first name, if that's okay. But I do want to just say that, you know, yeah, I admire all of you tremendously, and that's part of why I chose you to be part of this panel. So I'm interested in each of you sharing briefly what made you choose Rowan SOM, and what was your transition like to medical school? And let's see, Wilson, you want to start us off?
Sure, why not? Um, okay, so I remember the second part of the question was my transition. I forgot the first. Oh, why I chose Rowan SOM. Yes, so for me it was very easy. When I was applying to medical schools, one of my priorities was to look for schools that have that prioritize diversity and inclusion. And Rowan SOM was right at the top of the list. And that was back in 2019. All right. So there's been so much amazing work after that. So it's even better now. So that was one of the big decisions for choosing Rowan SOM. And the second one was Dean Watkins. And she is great at what she does. She called me and she said, you know, she has a scholarship for me, and that was easy. With everything that everyone else had to offer, I just felt like it was a place for me. And transitioning to medical school, I think one thing that really prepared me was I did a graduate program, an intensive graduate program. So my transition wasn't as bad as I thought, because I kind of had that readiness coming in. So that's it.
All right, who wants to jump in here? We don't have to go in any particular order.
I could jump in next.
Mhm.
So my transition was where I kind of started, because I was like Wilson, a graduate student. After I got out of Rutgers, I worked a little bit as a medical scribe for like 5 years, so not a little bit. And in that time, I was doing my graduate and degree in biomedical science at Rowan. I built a lot of connections here at Rowan University in Stratford campus, and from there, I kind of just felt naturally the next step would be to apply and just see if all the knowledge that I'd gained gave me the confidence to, you know, take that next step in being in medical school. And I really didn't feel comfortable applying to other places. I doubted myself a lot. That's a whole different story. But Rowan really even gave me that confidence to just say, you know, you can try, apply, do it. And when I got accepted, I had even more support to keep me through the process, which was really nice.
I can jump in as well. Again, my name is Charles Mcdaniel, and I chose Rowan SOM for a multitude of reasons. I went here to Rowan GSBS for graduate school. Loved the graduate school program. I got to know the staff really well, and I felt like the transition from there to medical school would be smooth. I felt supported. Dean Watkins was a major critical part not only my attendance at Rowan SOM, but my presence at Rowan SOM currently, and things of the like. And since coming, I felt supported. Um, the transition here was smooth, but I took some time off between grad school and medical school. I worked for a while at Memorial Sloan Kettering in Manhattan. I worked as an EMT maybe for about a year and a half, and I actually taught ninth grade algebra for a year right before coming. So quite a few years before attending between graduate school and here makes me a bit of a non-traditional student. But even with that time lapse, I felt like coming into a place where I knew a large part of the faculty, the teachers. I felt like I would have a great transition. I knew that I would be supported, so it was like a no-brainer.
I can jump in. So I won't repeat what everybody else has said, but it's kind of similar for me where Dean Watkins is concerned, but also I thought that one thing that was really important for me was the fact that I was, like everybody else, a non-traditional student, meaning that I took some time off between undergrad and medical school. I did grad school, but I also worked for like 3 years. And I did not work in medicine. I actually worked as a financial advisor. So just kind of working, and like I said, grad school, I felt like it's a little different coming into school when you're not just fresh out of undergrad. And I think Rowan it seemed like the place where you would be supported and nurtured, given that, again, you're not a traditional student. And that was a big factor for me.
Can I jump in too? This is so cheesy, but I don't think I picked Rowan. I feel like they kind of picked me. I was kind of limited in the geography where I could apply to school, and it was just when I submitted the application, it just felt right when I did it. And I got accepted kind of late in the cycle, so I really didn't think everything was going to work out and I was going to have to do another application cycle. But then Dean Watkins called and left me this amazing voicemail about having a spot for me. And I cried because it was just something that I'd worked so hard for, because like a lot of people have already mentioned, they were non-traditional students. And that was my journey as well. I did graduate school, I did undergrad, I worked, I did a post-bac, like I did everything I did to get here. And so it just kind of worked out for me. And my transition has been interesting. Um, Everybody has had like a really great experience with it so far, but it's been a little bit tough for me. Not the social aspects, but I think kind of being non-traditional, and maybe my graduate program might not have been as rigorous, but it's been challenging to kind of find my footing in medical school. And, I came in here thinking I was going to excel in ways that I had previously done. And it's like been a real reality check that you're with like the smartest of the smartest of the smartest. And, your best is good, but sometimes you just feel like it's not good enough. So that is my take on it.
To add on to that, I was also non-traditional student. I took 2 gap years in between undergrad and medical school, and I worked as an EMT. So really, I didn't really do anything educational during that time, aside just like working and stuff. So my transition was pretty rough too. And I think that's where Noelle and I can relate, where we've had a little bit of the same struggles coming into school and, going from like, for me, 0 to 100 for studying. And it's a huge reality check. You go from, I'm sure everybody else has gotten the straight A's for a very long time. And really hard when you come into school and you fail something for the first time ever. So it's been rough, but it gets better.
I can go next. When it comes to why I chose Rowan, so it goes back to my background. So I finished undergrad in 2013. I did a master's program and for a year, And then I worked for almost 5 years before starting medical school in a scientific, I was like an exploratory research scientist in New York City. So I knew that I wanted to go to medical school, but I didn't feel like the traditional curriculum was going to work for me because the work that I had been doing was so free form, looking for my own resources, reading primary sources. So I was really excited about Rowan because at the time they were the only medical school that had a purely problem-based learning curriculum. And I was very passionate about that. And I knew based on how I already learned that that curriculum was going to work for me. So when I got accepted and I got accepted into the PBL track, I was really happy, and it's a decision that I'm really glad that I made for my medical school journey. Transitioning to medical school, however, was still difficult because I had been out of a technically academic, taking exams regularly environment for so long. Um, and I think the biggest challenge was just trusting yourself to know because there's so many things that can break down your confidence, as so many of my classmates have said. When you fail something for the first time, it hurts, especially if that's never happened to you before. You've always been the high achiever, and your family's telling you that you're so amazing, and everybody's telling you you're so amazing, but you don't feel amazing. You have to have the strength to be able to keep pushing so that you can actually be amazing and not let the imposter syndrome set in. So I feel like the transition in that respect was really difficult, just acclimating to the workload, and everyone calls it drinking out of the fire hose, or eating pancakes is my favorite one. Someone gives you a stack of 10 pancakes today and you're like, "Great, I love pancakes." And you eat all 10. And then the next day they give you another 10 and you're like, "Okay, pancakes." And then can you continue to eat 10 pancakes every day for 2.5 to 4 years? You're gonna be sick of pancakes. But if you don't eat them today, then you have to eat them another day. So I think that just the volume of medical school is what's really challenging. And then that can end up feeling overwhelming if you don't have the right support. So the transition is difficult in some ways, very rewarding in other ways. Not getting a paycheck was jarring for a little bit, and then but I don't regret it at all because every single day I've been working for myself and to build my future and to build a better world for my patients, and I feel like that's really rewarding. And now the end of it is near, and that feels even better. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. So Nerica, I'm going to start off with you. What are some common misconceptions candidates or new students have about medical school?
Sure. So I can give 3 off the top of my head. The first one is thinking that because you were a straight A student, as Darlene mentioned, you're gonna come in and you're gonna get straight A's. Sorry, hate to be the bearer of bad news, but welcome to medical school. Doesn't work like that. It's not to say you can't get A's in medical school. You most certainly can and probably will, but it is definitely not the same as undergrad, and it is not the same as even graduate school. I did graduate school, for example, and I had straight A's in biochemistry, and pretty much my whole class failed that first biochemistry exam. So it's just a different ball game, and you have to be able to recognize that early and be comfortable with that. Um, the second thing kind of rolls off the first one, and that is the same study strategies that you used prior to med school are going to work. Again, not true. You can most certainly rely on some of your fundamental principles, but um, you have to be able to adjust. You have to be able to realize that perhaps for every class, you'll have to kind of take on a different style in order, to be successful. So if you're coming straight from undergrad and you're like me, who I'm Jamaican, and so I came to undergrad directly from Jamaica, and we don't do standardized testing. In Jamaica, everything is critical based thinking, meaning you write everything out from scratch, right? We don't do multiple choice exams very rarely. Everything is like what we call paper 2, which is just written based. And so the way I studied in undergrad, and even grad school was I would read something and I would write how I understood it. And whilst that worked to get me through everything, in med school, I realized that it works part way, but it can't be the only thing you do because you'll see these medical textbooks, they're no joke. And sometimes you really just don't have the time. One class may be 6 weeks. In that 6 weeks, let's be serious. Like you can't read the material in that time. And then the third thing is, and this is really important, is when it comes to social interactions. Um, and I want to preface this by saying, by no means necessary am I saying you should lose yourself in medical school, but sometimes people come in and they think they are going to be able to have the same social interactions that they've had before, meaning every Friday night, you probably went to Philly or like you went out drinking or whatever the case may be. And so for some people, when the time comes, so there is a thing at Rowan called a green weekend or a red weekend. Red weekend is the weekend before your exams. Green weekend is obviously the weekend after exams are done. And some people have a difficult time giving up certain social things right before an exam. And, you know, I find that a lot of time that causes them to fail exams because again, this is medical school. It's not undergrad and it's certainly not grad school. You would think it's close, but it's not. It's very different. And so just in general, thinking that you can, whatever you used to do before and you just fly by, or if you don't put 1,000% into something and it still worked out for you, forget it. Tell you right now, you need to be able to go hard every time if you're going to be successful, of course, with balance, which we can talk about later. But yeah, those would be the top 3 misconceptions.
Thank you. Is there anything anyone wants to add?
I have something to say also. There are a lot of resources that are available at the school for students, but I think one of the biggest challenges that first and second year students face is not recognizing when you need help because the school and the institution and all of the organizations can't help you if you don't ask for it. So we have all every single one of us in this room has been able to mentor and help students through whatever challenges that they face through medical school. But then there are also some students who um, don't realize that they could maybe use some assistance until it's too late. So I think, being very introspective and intentional about recognizing when you need help or if you might need help is really key for making sure that you can take full advantage of everything that the school has to offer to make sure that you're as successful as you can be.
So I'm going to throw another question in the mix. During your medical school journey, what adjustments have you made in how you study and learn? Some of you have kind of mentioned that already. And what are academic resources that you found helpful? Wilson, can you start us off?
Sure. I think the right way to ask that question would be, when have I not made adjustments? And the answer to that is going to be never, because I think Narika already talked about this. It's one of the misconceptions coming in is that, you thrive and survive in undergrad and graduate school with a certain style of studying. Why that worked for you during the times, it might be different for medical school. And I can almost guarantee it's going to not be the only way to study. So starting from my first year, I had things that worked for me for grad school. So when I started that, we started anatomy in the SGL track. Anatomy is pretty much a lot of memorization, a little bit of understanding there, here and there, but a lot of memorization and a lot of material thrown at you at once. So you have to find a way to assimilate all this material. And one big thing, one advice I'll give to the incoming students is you really have to be willing to get out of your comfort zone. I know it's like, you have short time between blocks or between systems to change things and try things and see if this works. But you have to be willing to take that step, because if I didn't take that step, I would not even know what worked for me. I'm not even sure I'll be here. Um, but I was willing to try new things. For example, studying for anatomy, I started, I would write things down. I would look at pictures, trying to label them. Moving on to biochem, which is a lot more understanding. I started looking at outside resources to help me like picturize and other things like that. Now, like even up to like now right now in third year, what I do now is just doing questions, right? Which is unlike what I've done in the past. Before I would watch videos and do this and that. But that's just to say I've tried things with every block and with every year. And again, just be willing to get outside your comfort zone, to try new things and see what works for you. And I think a lot of first year of medical school is really figuring out how you learn, how you assimilate a lot of information. I think we all come in, yeah, like a lot of my peers are shaking their head because you're lost, man. As a first year medical student, you have to find your way. Sorry to break it to you, but you have to really figure out what works for you, right? And you cannot do that without trying new things. So
Yeah, I second everything Wilson said. And even circling back to the first question about misconceptions, I think a lot of people think that this process, even though you have to figure yourself out, that you do it alone. It's not an individualized, like self-contained process. Like I know what mistakes I make. I'm completely omnipresent and know exactly what I need to do to adjust to get an A. You actually need other third parties coming in and saying, well, this is what I did, or this is what I see you doing, or this is things that have benefited me in the past. Even if you don't agree with them, you still have to try them, like Wilson said. And it might not be something that works every time for you, but can work situationally. So, like Wilson was saying, knowing what kind of learner you are. For me, if I was studying anatomy, I personally don't read a textbook because it's a whole lot of memorization. I'm just going to be reading pages and pages and not really absorbing what the main points are. But if I'm going to do something that's high memorization, I'll use flashcards. So something like that, I'll say get an Anki deck for anatomy, get an Anki deck for pharmacology, things that are just repeat memorization. You need to see them over and over to understand them. And I don't recommend any one learning resource, rather the way that you use them. So again, I recommend flashcards for things that are high repetition, things that you need to repeat over and over again, kind of to memorize. But for something like physiology, something that requires your conceptual knowledge, you have to think your way through a problem. You might want to use a textbook, or you might want to have a discussion with people and see how they understand it and get a concept from someone else's perspective. Even seeing a picture, like Wilson was saying, will help you to get that into your mind and cement it better. So that's one thing that I would want people to do in adjusting their learning process, is actually collaborate more and work with, don't be afraid to work with other people. Don't feel like you have to be ready or up to a certain par in your knowledge to work with your peers, because everyone here is smart and eventually we're going to be working together. So you need to learn how to have that confidence in yourself to say, I want to know more about this. I need to know more about this. Can you help me? And that's a big part of it.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I think this is not necessarily an academic resource, but the resource that I found most helpful were students above me. And that's because I was able to say, hey, um, how did you get through this class? Or how did you get through this exam? What did you do? The important thing to recognize with that, though, is everyone will tell you something different. And so whatever people tell you, you want to ensure that you're taking it with a grain of salt. What works for someone else may not necessarily work for you, but you want to listen with intent, right? You're listening to figure out, okay, of all the things that they're saying, what feels right to me, or what sounds most like me? What can I realistically do or try and it works out? I'll give you an example. I didn't know about Sketchy Medical before medical school. And it's a great resource that I found for micro and farm and even pathology come later on. But these are classes I took before and I never used that resource, but I realized that the depth of information that I was going to have, when some people said, oh, read, you know, like the Lippincott book or read this book, but then other people were like sketchy. Other people said made flashcards. I found that watching the sketchy videos helped for me because it's visual memorization. And I didn't realize until then that, oh, I actually do really well with visual aids. So that's kind of like another thing, right? When people are telling you this information, you want to kind of look into yourself and think, okay, if you don't know like me, you could figure it out. But if you already know that you're a visual learner or you're an audio learner, kind of listen out for the different resources that they're going to advise you to use that fits that for you.
Yeah, I kind of agree with everyone on that. I just speak to, you know, certain personal points that helped me develop as a student, and you know, coming in, especially in regard to what Melvin said, coming in, you're kind of used to. Well, I was used to studying solely on my own. I wasn't really willing to. My peers can probably attest. I wasn't really willing to study in groups. I thought it would like slow me down. I thought it would impact me negatively, but I came to learn that studying in groups wasn't necessarily about um, anything in particular, but it was about seeing what other people know, how they know it, and what you and from that learning what your gaps were. And that was like ultimately what was important to me, learning what my gaps were before the exam and being able to assess that and move forward, properly. And secondly, on top of that, what made me a better student was when I learned to essentially practice how I played. And what I mean by that is doing questions and doing them in a style of which they were the same as the test. Because you do all this studying, you use all these materials, you use the sketchy, you use the boards and beyond, you use the first aid, whatever you use, and you can go over it 1,000,001 times. But if you haven't learned it, if you haven't learned to use it in a way that answers the question correctly, you're just sitting on you're sitting at the test with a lot of information. And so that like really in my first year, my first couple courses, I learned a lot just by taking the test, by trial and error in a way. So I would take tests and I would see stuff like, whoa, I know all this stuff. I know 2 + 2 is 4, but now they're asking me the radius of the sun, and this is not working out. And so, I began to learn a lot of those things. I just began to do trial and error before the test actually came by using question prep, by using my peers, and those things essentially, helped me get to where I am today.
So I'm going to throw another question in the mix. And Noelle, as our only first year, I'm going to start off with you. What was a mistake you made in this first year, and what did you learn from it? And then all of you that are further along, you're going to have to go back and think back to your first year and think about what's a mistake you made.
I've made all of the mistakes, and I am still making mistakes. Just kind of tying in with the 2 previous questions and what a lot of the upperclassmen have said about not being afraid to ask for help. You need to come into medical school with a certain level of humility and humble yourself, because we're all coming from a place where we've been the best at everything that we've done. We've never failed classes, or we've never gotten lower than that. And it's just a reality check when you get here that, so has everybody else. And you need to be able to humble yourself to be able to reflect on those failures that you've had, or in order to be able to move forward and really grasp the things that you need to grasp. When you get a question wrong, it's not, don't be embarrassed to share that with your friends, or find a peer group that you can trust and study with, because if you aren't afraid to say the wrong answer, then it's going to be even that more difficult to be able to discern the correct answer, or be able to have the knowledge base to get to the right answer from that. So just being humble was probably something that I could have benefited from coming in, knowing when to ask for help. It's hard, again, to ask for help and to feel like you're not succeeding in the way that you want to succeed, or that you feel internally this pressure that you put on yourself on needing to perform at a certain level because you're here and, I'm a medical student and, we're supposed to be these brilliant, smart minds. And, not everybody is inherently born with this like high level of intelligence, this natural intelligence. Like some of us have to work really hard for it. And some of us work harder than others. And to be able to recognize that in yourself is really important. What other mistakes? I guess not reaching out sooner for things that I struggled with. I had a really hard time in the second block, as Darlene knows, because she and I have had several conversations about this. Don't waiting until it's too late to ask for help. Because once it's too late, like it's too late. Like you're kind of at this impasse and you might have to pull like a literal Hail Mary to pass the course, and the odds of that are not always going to be in your favor. And then also having realistic expectations. I had a friend who'd started med school a year before me, and we had similar stats and everything, and he was telling me all these fantastic grades he was getting on all his exams, and I'm like, oh wow, that doesn't seem like it's too bad. And then I got to med school and that was not the case for me. So being able to like understand that about yourself and just have good introspection, which I'm working on.
Thanks, Noelle. Thank you. And thank you for being transparent. I appreciate that. I'll take one or two other people who wants to share a
I can speak
mistake you
about
made first year.
my experience during first year. I think Noelle and I have had very similar struggles in first year. I also struggled with my second block. I think my biggest problem was balance. Balancing my personal life, my social life, and schoolwork, and also family, which we will speak about later on. But for me, I was coming from a place where I was never really the person to have a lot of friends in like undergrad because I was so focused and to me, I had such limited time in undergrad and I had to do this, I had to do that, a million things going on. So my social life kind of fell off in undergrad, but when I came to medical school, I was like, I really should try to explore and be more open. Little do you know, that was a little bit of a downfall. um, so I eventually had to find that balance, and then my personal life was also suffering. So I think to add on to like the previous questions about misconceptions, you don't have to study every single day, every single hour, minutes of the day. You can have this balance where, okay, I'm going to start at this time, I'm going to stop at this time, and dedicate 2 hours to your personal life, dedicate 1 hour to self-care. Self-care is so important to making it. And I think finding that balance is what's going to carry you through medical school.
Yeah, I agree with Darlene, especially as it comes to balance. I think in the beginning you get overwhelmed by the workload or even the prospect of the workload. You see, so everybody's doing something, and then you start to hear people say they get these grades or that grades, and you're wondering like, how are you doing it? Oh, I got to put in more hours, and it's only 24, right? You only got to sleep, and you got to sleep 8, so it's only 16, and you got to eat, so then it's only 13. You know what I mean? And so you start to think about what can I do for myself? And then part of it, you read so much and you do so much questions and you do so much work. If you lose that part of yourself, the work begins to become so monotonous that is not fun no more. And then once it's not fun, you can't do it. You can't even study for 2 hours now because you know what I mean? It kind of feels torturous in a way. So if you maintain yourself and like somebody said earlier, maintain your humility and understand that you're not gonna know everything. Understand that there isn't going to be a question on every single line in the textbook. There's only 100 some questions. You know what I mean? Focus on salient points and things like that. And as you come to it, you get a little better. But balance is ultimately important to be able to do that and understand that you got to be well rounded in some respect.
So I want to throw another question in the mix, and I'm thinking about support. And as a person underrepresented in medicine, how do you develop a community of support? And how do you find physician mentors? And Charles, if we can start off with you.
As a person underrepresented in medicine, I think finding support is difficult because there are not a lot of people who look like you. But I think the first thing you need to understand is that people don't need to look like you to be able to help you, right? And so, like someone was saying earlier too, you gotta understand when you need help, right? You gotta understand yourself before you need help and how vital it is to be able to talk to someone who's been where you are. You know what I mean? When you're learning things as a kid or as a youth, you talk to your parents because they've seen the world before you've seen it, even though you're a little hard headed. And that's the same thing with mentors, right? And so you see mentors in medicine like Dr. Chanel. And Dr. Chanel, when you meet her, she seems tough, but she's loving in a way that she understands some of the pitfalls that we face. She understands some of the pitfalls that she's faced, and her job ultimately is to prevent you from making those same ones. And so you seek out people who have that sort of willingness to help, who have that sort of willingness to just take you under the wing. A lot of the mentors I found were um, primarily through serendipity, but also once I got them, they taught me how to seek more, how to, understand that if you're interested in cardiology, why not go and talk to the cardiology professor? You know what I mean? Just ask a few questions and see, if you guys have some common interests outside of what you look like or what you feel. But also it is important to link up with those people who look and feel like you, just because you need that sort of comfort so that you aren't always looking at yourself as if you don't belong. I think once you understand that you do belong and you find people you can identify with, even in your class, even below you in class, you start to feel a little more at home. And once you feel like that, everything kind of doesn't get easier. It just feels a little smoother. You know what I mean?
Thank you. Anyone else want to chime in?
Yeah, I can echo what Charlie said. As Stuco president, I interact with almost every different physician from all the different specialties and leadership positions from even different medical schools, like the deans of other schools included. And I agree with Charlie. You won't see a lot that really look like you or even speak like you or have experiences the same as you, especially because everybody's different. That's just the nature. But the thing is you have to be able to start being understanding of that part of the world, that things are bigger than you and your experiences. And when you enter this kind of profession, you're going to have to adopt that into your practice every day, that you are a part of this continuum of humanity and your experience enriches that. And you need to learn about other people's experiences and have that in order to make yourself richer. So just because a mentor doesn't necessarily look like you, their experiences as a doctor or their experiences as a person who comes from a first generation college background or their socioeconomic status or however they might identify with you otherwise than their phenotypic appearance is something that you can benefit from. And you just have to sit and take that time to listen and recognize that benefit for what it is. And that is when you go and treat people in the real world, you're not going to have the choice to choose what your patient looks like or what their background is, but you need that experience. You need to have that composure and understanding to empathize with them. So that's something about mentorship to be had beyond just your own development and what your goals are, but appreciating what other people are who are at the level where you want to be.
I think another key thing with this is, especially not just mentorship, but in general, a community of support. I still struggle with this, but I think a lot of us actually struggle with the whole, I don't like to bother people. Um, and honestly, like in med school, there is no place for that. We could say it over and over. You need to know when you need support. You need to reach out for help. And it's not to be annoying, but it's true, right? You have to kind of do away with the whole I don't want to bother people thing, because you will have to bother people. And in all actuality, you're not bothering anyone. I think what kind of helped me in the instances that I've gotten over it and actually reached out to people and it worked, was to recognize that mentorship or even support, right? It's a two-way street. So if you're reaching out to someone for support or help, it's kind of like, and they're responding to you, make sure you do your due diligence and follow up with them. Or even if you asked someone like a question once and they follow up with you, it's just courtesy to kind of follow up again with them to let them know, you're grateful. And that's how you're going to build that, because as much as you're not being a bother, people also don't like to feel like, oh, you just want something. Why? You know what I mean? So, and the thing about this too is not everyone who you talk to you will click with, and that's perfectly okay. It's nothing personal. Try not to take these things personal. You have to find sort of who you jive with. And from there on, it just becomes like an organic thing.
I wanted to
Uh,
say also, sorry,
Mhm.
go ahead. Okay,
Go ahead,
I'll
Alicia.
just say what I have to say real quick.
okay.
When it comes when it comes to mentors, there really is no such thing as a perfect mentor. You might find somebody who has one aspect of something that you admire and you want to cultivate. So just being open to recognizing that everybody has different talents. Also, sometimes when it comes to that doesn't mean you need to have a million mentors, but it just means, you have to understand like there's a limit to how people can help you. And because everybody has different talents, they're going to have different strengths. And then the last thing I wanted to say is sometimes mentorship is going to feel really good. And when it feels good, then you're going to be more comfortable talking to that person. You're going to feel less like a bother because that person is welcoming. And also be very cognizant of when mentorship feels bad, when somebody is belittling you or just making you feel like you're incapable or nothing that you do is good enough. That's also uh, sometimes happens with mentors. So recognizing how you feel in the interaction, what you feel comfortable giving, as well as what you get back is really important in developing a really strong system.
Do we have to move on? I can keep my.
Go ahead, real quick, Wilson. We have
Okay,
two
real
more
quick.
questions. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so Melvin kind of just talked about this, and being a position of leadership and like kind of requires you to interact with all this faculty and staff on a daily basis. I've been in my class leadership for the past 3 years as a curriculum representative, and I cannot tell you how many doors that has opened up for me. Pretty much all the mentors that I have right now was, you know, me meeting people or like faculty and teachers or block directors will help me one way or another. And, I kind of kept that relationship and that opened up a lot of doors to me. So get involved. When you get that email or from the school, like a position is available, elections are coming up, apply for it. Don't be scared. I promise you it's going to seem hard, but it's refreshing and it's very rewarding.
Thank you.
I just want to say one more thing. I'm sorry, Yvonne. I just wanted to jump in and say that it's ultimately important when you do meet mentors, or when you do have mentors, especially as an underrepresented student. It's important to be honest. It's important to be transparent. I think that my ability to do that has helped me become able to use mentors well, not use them in the literal sense, but help me be able to use them adequately. Help them help me in that way. A large part of me, especially when you find people that look like you in this sector, you want to be excellent in the way that you see them as excellent, and so you don't always say, "Oh, I'm not doing well," or "Oh, I'm struggling with this," or "Oh, I'm struggling with that." And that absence of humility is sometimes what keeps you back. I know someone said humility earlier. I want to shout you out on that because that's like a big major point. And especially when it comes to mentorship and leadership, you always want to try your best to say, "I'm struggling," and it's okay to say that because everybody's struggling. Just nobody really wants to admit it, especially in this field, especially in the beginning, especially as a minority. We don't always have all the resources. We don't always have the know-how. We're sometimes, and it's easy to get in muddy water quick. I just wanted to make sure that I said that I had that point to make earlier. I just got lapsed in my talking, but I wanted to say that. Sorry to cut you off.
It's okay. No, that was a great point to make. I'm going to actually skip one of our questions about family because I see it's 12:31, but I do want to ask this last question because I think it's critically important. Um, and some of you brought this idea of self-care up, and I want to talk a little bit about depression, right? Medical students and residents and physicians have some of the highest rates of depression and suicide. And so in your medical school journey, how have you exercised self-care, specifically with regard to your mental health? Alicia, can you start us off?
Sure. So depression is something that I think most of us have faced throughout the medical school process where, you have your feelings of inadequacy and you don't know if you belong there and the imposter syndrome sets in. Um, but and also this whole process requires a lot of sacrifices in ways that we've already talked about. But I think it's really important to make sure you know what your non-negotiables are. Like you know that you're not going to be able to maybe do the same things in the same frequency that you did before, but you need to know in order to keep your core and in order to keep your internal peace, the minimum of things that you need to do. So for me, self-care manifested in three different tiers. I small, medium, and big, basically. So when things were really bothering me, when things were like kind of annoying and I needed a moment, I could sit down and make a cup of tea and just sit quietly for a little bit and be able to move on. When things got to be a little bit more overwhelming, my partner and I would go out for dinner because I knew that, dropping everything for a little bit and going out to dinner with my partner would help me to reset. And then for big things, when, everything is compounded and you feel like you just need a hard reset, for me, my partner and I would find a place to go for a hike, at least be away for, a few hours and just kind of decompress. So I think, like I said, recognizing what your non-negotiables are going to help you keep a strong core. Um, and also, there are so many resources available through the school. When I was going through my first year, I was struggling with test anxiety compounded with imposter syndrome, and I felt like I was drowning. I'm sure I'm not the only person who felt that way, but I really did feel like I was drowning just because there's so many new things all at once. But the school has a lot of resources. There is a psychologist that the school has available, Dr. Furtaugh, who has been completely instrumental in helping me with my confidence and figuring out, who I am in this process and helping me keep, what my non-negotiables are at the forefront of my mind so that I can build around it. And there's plenty of academic coaching. And if you have the strength to be able to reach out for help, there are resources in place that the school can connect you to. So I think just recognizing, doing regular self check-ins and also having like three different tiers of how you take care of yourself and maintain self-care um, will help you keep yourself intact during this process.
In addition to having non-negotiables, I think it's really important for you to have a reward system. You should reward yourself. This is medical school is a privilege, but it's also an extremely hard thing to do. And so each step of the way, you want to make sure that you're keeping that in mind. I know for me personally, after every exam, mostly during first and second year, because those are preclinical years. But after every exam, religiously, whether I felt like the exam went great, it went bad, it didn't matter. After every single exam, I went to get my nails done. Seems vain or, frivolous, but have a reward system. So whatever that may look like for you, if you want to maybe binge a show for a couple hours, whatever you need to do, just kind of have that reward system. And that kind of kept me sane. My appointments were already set up prior to me going to the exam. So regardless of what happened during the exam, I was going to leave and go to the nail shop. So just kind of have that reward system, because good or bad, it's just an opportunity to improve the next time. So yeah.
Yeah, and just to wrap that up, like I also have just one mode, like lazy. Like once I'm done, I'm done. I unplug. I try not to overdo any one day and just try and attack the, beginning of every day really hard. That's just my style. And that's what really keeps me going. And when I things get really hard, I try to be vulnerable. I just try to be more honest. Like if the harder things get, I know it sounds really crazy, and that's the underlying part of like being humble that really feels uncomfortable is that vulnerability. And when you're vulnerable, it really frees you up a lot because you start to see other people have the same exact things that you're going through, and it's not always just imposter syndrome or just like the run of the mill depression. It's just like, man, I really couldn't even like clean my apartment today, and other people are like, yeah, I cleaned up in like 2 weeks, like no big deal. Like you start to feel more normal about some of these things that come with this abnormal experience of medical school, and you find strength in that community where sometimes some of the things you are experiencing are really abnormal. Like the TBC found out people were having like racist experience or different experiences where they were out in the hospital and people weren't being professional towards them, and we started to notice that if we discussed this with each other, it gave us strength. It didn't necessarily make us feel like we were less because of that experience. We were actually able to make changes because of those experiences because we discussed them and manifested something that we wanted to see improve. So I encourage you to use your vulnerability as a strength, and not to be cliche or just throw buzzwords at you, but those are real tools that you have to keep in mind in actual places that you need to take yourself. So if you feel like things are overwhelming, just be vulnerable, tell somebody, and it helps a lot.
I guess I should add my 2 cents. Like Nyerica, I go after every exam to go get my nails done and a pedicure. And like she said, it sounds really vain, but it's really just like 2 hours to be able to decompress, do nothing with your brain, and just be able to exist in a space without pressure, without, having to meet a deadline or anything like that. And a big thing about medical school is understanding that you can't do all of the things all of the time, all in one day. There's always going to be something you need to review. There's always going to be something you can tighten up on. There's always going to be a deadline for something. If you're not studying for an exam, people are prepping for board. I mean, I'm in first year and people are already talking about board prep. Like you're always going to be doing something, and being able to find balance and fit little moments in your day is important. Whether it's getting an overpriced coffee, like do it. If it's making your bed in a way that when you come home at the end of the day, you have this space that you just feel really great in, do it. It's just whatever brings you joy in life, just do it. Even to incorporate something small every single day can actually make the hard times a little less hard and dark and depressing.
Thanks, Noelle. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn this back over to Sarah. I know we are over time, and I appreciate if you are out there that you are still on here hanging in. I could talk to all of you forever, and I want to just thank you for your time. I know you have a lot of pulls on your time, and so I really appreciate it. If you are, soon to be new medical students, you should know, I mean, certainly our fourth years are gearing up for graduation. But if you are a third year, you are still dealing with rotations and all of the things. And first and second year still have exams. And so there are lots of other things that they could be doing right now. So I appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you so much, Yvonne, and all of our student panelists. That was amazing. And again, like Yvonne said, thank you for giving up your time on this Saturday. This session was recorded, obviously, so if any of our prospective students or incoming students want to watch this at a later point, that will be available in a couple weeks. As well as you can reach out to any of us with any questions that maybe didn't get discussed during the session as well. But again, thank you to John and Paula for being here this morning too. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your weekend, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you, Sarah. I just want to jump in because I'd be remiss if I did not thank Yvonne for that amazing presentation. And to the Black Collective, to our students, I thank you so much for the work that you're doing and your transparency, because that is so valuable. And it's just amazing. And I'm just grateful to all of you for your time and for sharing with our incoming class the realities of medical school. But thank you so much. Outstanding work by everybody. And we know your time is valuable, but thank you.
And I'll just invite the students, if you're comfortable, thank you. I see Alicia put her email in the chat. That's what I was going to ask, is that if you're comfortable and you want people to stay in touch, please put your email in the chat for the participants. Thank you, everyone. And I'll hang back if anybody has questions for me or anything. I'm happy to hang back.
Perfect. I'll make sure to capture